Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The perils of toxic femininity. They're real. Give me an example. Rachel Zegler. She's that actress that's the lead in the Snow White remake that's out now.
Oh, yeah.
Which is bombing.
Horribly.
And this is just a little bit of Rachel Zegler. Zegler? I don't know. Don't care. Over the last 3 years in the run-up to the release of Snow White. It's a $250 million film. That's what it cost to make.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. I'm sure a lot of people will assume it's a love story just because, like, we cast a guy in the movie, Andrew Burnap, great dude. Yeah. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby. Like, who has been the most exciting person for you tonight?
Oh my God.
Besides me.
Took the words out of my mouth. Besides,
I'm a narcissist.
What an idiot I've been as a young person in this industry who has no filter and no idea what she's doing.
If I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Our rights are on the line, folks. Our reproductive rights. Come on. Go vote blue. And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button. I don't need your business. Thanks.
And I can only hope that despite my flaws and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
It grossed, what, $43 million last weekend?
The last line you heard there was her comparing herself
to who?
To the winged victory of Samothraki, the famous statue at the Louvre.
Oh my
Just
God.
as that statue is cracked, people still line up to see it. And so just as I am broken, as I'm a young woman making my way in Hollywood, and I make mistakes, I hope people will still line up to see what I'm doing. And, of course, instead, what they're doing is, what she's done is empty out the theaters, as many people have been posting. Empty theaters with this DEI Snow White. Babylon Bee had, this is sort of a commentary on Disney as well as on Mrs. Zegler. Babylon Bee yesterday, Disney awarded defense contract after producing more bombs than Lockheed Martin. Well, that's where it's at. Toxic femininity.
Wow.
For more on this topic, please be joined by Elizabeth Grace Matthew, a regular opinion contributor at The Hill, and at her Substack, elizabethgracematthew.substack.com. Miss Matthew, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is Rachel Zegler the kind of person you were talking about when you wrote in your piece about toxic femininity with respect to women and empathy? The question is whether women develop mastery over that empathy and harness it to complement reason, order, and responsibility rather than to patronize, excuse, or tokenize.
Yeah, to an extent, I think so. So I think that, there's been so much talk over so many years now about this idea of toxic masculinity, right? This idea of men who are indiscriminately aggressive or predatory or otherwise problematic in a civilized society. And of course, such a thing does exist, but often when we're talking about toxic masculinity on the left nowadays, What we're really talking about is reason and competence and the recognition of realities that might not fit our emotions, right? So there's toxic masculinity, and then there's just what we call masculinity. But what I'm sort of arguing is that those things, reason and the ability to see reality and to recognize one's own unimportance in certain situations, that's really about adulthood. That's really something that both men and women ought to cultivate. And sure, women can be predisposed to this sort of politicized empathy where on behalf of either themselves or on behalf of some oppressed individual or group, they can say, oh, this is the way you should feel and that should dictate how we behave. And that doesn't make a lot of sense for adults, whether men or women.
Right. I mean, the whole issue of empathy, sort of just the whole men and women being different. Let's start there, right? Men are going to be more aggressive. I mean, there are exceptions, but men are more sort of aggressive just in terms of personality and posture, and women tend to be more empathetic. That's just a phenomenon of nature, and so I guess you always think about we have to start from real premises to get to real answers, and that's the real premise.
Absolutely. And does it hold true to a person? No, of course. These are overlapping bell curves, right? So are there women who are more aggressive than certain men? Sure. But at the extremes of these bell curves, basically everybody who demonstrates extreme empathy by nature is going to be female, and basically everybody who demonstrates extreme aggression by nature is going to be male. And that's just something that we're sort of taught not to recognize or acknowledge, but it's a fact. And so accepting that fact, then we kind of need to think about, okay, if you are predisposed toward extreme empathy, how do we make sure that you marry that to an idea of reason and reality that does not have you sort of politicizing this idea of care for others in ways that actually damage your own understanding of the world, as well as often injure the very people you're trying to help. Say, for example, in educational spaces, which is what my background is in, implementing ideas of easier policies for grades, like grade inflation, or then restorative justice, or these sorts of ideas that wind up actually injuring these very people you claim to want to help, because you don't want to acknowledge that certain things like discipline and order must exist in order for people to actually pursue what you want them to be able to pursue.
There's I think I found the repository that produces this toxicity for both men and women.
What?
You may have heard of it. It's called College. There was a survey out this week. Forget Trump for a second. Let's do J.D. Vance, because, J.D. Vance, whatever you think about him, I mean, he's an Ivy League educated, articulate, room temperature kind of guy. I know he's had the childless cat lady's comments and some things, but for the most part, buttoned down, nice young family, professional. His wife's very successful and bright as well. See, and not to mention she's Indian American, so that you would think. But approve, disapprove of J.D. Vance. White men, no college degree, plus 36. White women, no college degree, plus 8. White men, college degree, minus 1. Wow. White women, college degree, minus 38. And there's like a 40-plus point swing for both men and women, just with the variable being college degreed or not.
Yeah, I think that is, unfortunately predictable. And it's really a shame. And it's part of why I think a lot of men are foregoing college and a lot of those educational opportunities that come with it, because I think that we have created spaces that are really hostile, not just to toxic masculinity, if you want to define that as sort of excesses of aggression that haven't matured into a adult way of being in the world. That's, of course, reasonable. We should have that anywhere. Of course, we allow it to sort of run rampant in K-12 schools where we no longer have order and discipline, which is a separate problem, but also related. But these colleges that are fostering exactly these ideas around the sorts of policies that we then implement in K-12 education, the sorts of ideologies that we now assume have to be accepted by everyone. And I think you've seen some pushback on that in recent weeks, not just among those who maybe support Trump, but also among those who don't, but are starting to be willing to acknowledge some of the shortcomings that the Democrats had in terms of their uncritical embrace of some of these ideas.
But you'd think among college students, at least, that J.D. Vance would be celebrated. I mean, he came from nothing and got good grades, went to Ohio State, then went to the Ivy League, and then went into the military to serve our country. I mean, shouldn't he be celebrated?
I think that there's really two aspects to it. I mean, of course, on the one hand, like it seems self-evident that that's someone that people should identify with across sex or across educational level. On the other hand, I think that we live in such a polarized moment right now that no matter who he was, I don't know how much approval you would get for him among people who went to college, given that he is Trump's vice president.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the partisan affiliation and the association is impactful, but it just still speaks, and you're right, it speaks to the politicized culture, it seems to me. But I wonder if you think that because the people that exhibit toxicity, a lot of them tend to be public figures and have followings, if the existence of this is wildly overstated?
That's a really interesting point. I think that among women who have gone to college, there is an elevation of uncritical empathy that has been politicized in relation to a lot of social justice type of movements. And of course, I'm not criticizing the impulse to social justice if that is done with the understanding of actual justice, right? No one is saying we shouldn't make sure that children who don't have meals in the summer get them or anything like that. At least I'm not saying that. But I think that when you have this uncritical idea of how the world works, that basically we could create a utopia if only, all the men would essentially get out of the way, that can become really genuinely toxic. And it's a form of femininity that really pulls on an idea of empathy that is not related to reality. And when you do that, you not only are unable to help the people you might want to help, but you also make yourself sort of look ridiculous. And that's exactly what happened with the Snow White, movie and the monologues that you were bringing up from Rachel Ziegler. Regardless of how the movie is, and I hear that it's terrible, I haven't seen it, but regardless of that, if a person behaves in that kind of a self-reverential way that makes them really unlikable and almost behaves as though everyone should be essentially taking preemptive pity on them because they're doing a Snow White that's not like the one in 1937, that's just really off-putting to everyone except other college-educated women.
Yeah, I mean, it's just even the characterization. Now, this is just a representative of so much of the dreck in our culture, but her representation of the 1937 Snow White film as basically like a precursor to Fatal Attraction, the prince is stalking. I mean, it's just so silly. I mean, it's the kind of thing you could only learn in a college setting. And it really speaks, I guess, to your point, and since this is your background, what's happening in the incubator of, ideas and culture in so many respects, and that is pre-K through post-secondary education, not just college, but all the way through.
Yes, and a lot of these ideas, as they find their way down into post-secondary and elementary and secondary education, a lot of them do meet with pushback from parents, as well as, I think, as you're increasingly seeing, from young people themselves, particularly young men. And I think now, if there's any positive to this, which I don't really think there is, but if there is, one of them might be that people are now becoming aware of just how alienated from the mainstream educational zeitgeist that has dealt in so much toxic femininity young men today actually are. And I think that recognition may help to give people at least some understanding that, you know, if you're a 16-year-old boy and you haven't really had time to do much other than exist in this ecology that really is teaching you things that seem directly opposed to reality, you are going to develop a derisive understanding of that ecology. And since that's something that presumably we don't want young men turning on education writ large, we're going to have to modify some aspects of what we're doing in order to have any credibility.
Elizabeth Grace Matthew is a regular opinion contributor at The Hill, thehill.com. She also writes at her Substack, elizabethgracematthew.substack.com. Elizabeth Grace Matthew, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.